Hey everyone, this is Matt Hendricks with the Sharpening Guy, and today I'm going to show you how to sharpen your average pocket knife. Now, different pocket knives have different types of blade grinds. This one you'll see has a flat grind, but not all the way up the blade, so there's a distinct wide bevel on it. Some of them have a bevel like this only at the hollow grind, or occasionally you might even find one that's a convex grind. Now, this one actually started out as a hollow grind, and through repeated sharpenings, as it was thinned, the hollow grind became a flat grind, and it cuts just fine. And honestly, if you have a hollow grind, that's probably the best thing to do, because otherwise the only real way to maintain a hollow grind is if you know how to use a contact wheel on a belt grinder. And well, one, the equipment is expensive, and two, that requires a lot more skill to be able to do that. But anyway, so otherwise, sharpening a pocket knife like this is really going to be pretty straightforward. The only other thing I want to mention is I'm showing you how to sharpen a knife like this in terms of making it cut through things really well. If you were sharpening a pocket knife that you wanted to use for wood carving, whether you wanted to make really nice feather sticks if you were camping, or whether you just wanted to whittle something or you know, stuff like that, then you're going to actually want to sharpen it differently than this, because for wood carving like that, you want a different type of bevel. And I'll do another video explaining how to do that. But for everyday stuff like, you know, opening boxes, cutting up cardboard, you know, whatever you normally use a pocket knife for, this is the best way to do it. So anyway, so what we're gonna do is this knife is in pretty good shape. There's nothing really wrong with it. I've sharpened it before, like I mentioned earlier. So all I really need to do is kind of maintain where we're at and then resharpen the edge. So I'm going to start off with a rough stone, but you could start off with a medium stone if you don't have a rough stone. And like I said, if you're sharpening a knife to cut through things like this, you're going to want to thin it out. Or if it's already thin enough, because this knife is, because I've sharpened it before, then you're going to want to still thin it a little bit to maintain that thinness as you sharpen the edge. So anyway, if you have a knife with a wide bevel like this, you're going to lay the wide bevel flat on your stone, and you're going to thin on the wide bevel. If your knife had a full flat grind where it was tapered from the spine all the way to the edge, you'd lay it flat, and then you would just lift the spine up slightly to thin just behind the edge, like I show in most of my kitchen knife sharpening videos. So anyway, so I'm going to lay the flat wide bevel down and just start grinding back and forth here like this. I'm going to take the fingers on this hand and push over the part where I want to remove steel. Now you'll notice this knife has a ricasso, so in order to thin this part up here, as we get close to the ricasso, we're going to have to make the blade parallel to the stone and push like that. And then we can go back to the 45-degree angle we usually sharpen and thin at for the rest of the blade. You can check and see where you're grinding, and you should probably check a lot more often than I do. Obviously I've done this so much I pretty much know where I'm grinding, so I don't check near as much. There we go, and we'll do the other side. So I don't really count strokes or anything, but you do want to do roughly the same amount on each side of the blade. Now the real way to tell if you're doing that is when you think you're done, stop and observe and say, are my grind lines the same height? Does it feel even on each side of the blade? And stuff like that, because even if you use the same number of strokes on each side of the blade, it doesn't necessarily mean you remove the same amount of steel. You know, maybe you pushed a little bit harder on one side, maybe your strokes were a little bit longer on one side than the other, stuff like that. So I'm not really into counting, but you still want to make sure that you're sharpening the blade evenly. All right, so like I said, this knife was already in pretty good shape. Just need to be resharpened. And it was already thin enough from my previous sharpening. So all the thinning I'm doing here is just to maintain the thinness it is already at. Because as the edge gets back into thicker steel, if I don't move the thinned part or the main blade grind back a little bit, then every time I sharpen the edge is just going to get thicker and thicker. So anyway, that's all the thinning I need to do. That looks good, feels nice and thin. So now at this point, if I want to, I can polish this thinned part up as much as I want. So for instance, I could grab 1,000 grit stone here. And just on the 1,000 grit stone, I could just remove the scratches from the rough stone. And that rough stone I was using was a 400 grit. It's not really important exactly what grits you use, but just in case you were wondering. And you would not have to polish up the scratches from your rough or medium stone where you thinned it if you didn't want. Your knife will still cut perfectly fine even if you leave them rougher and just then move on to sharpening the edge. But if you just want to make your knife look prettier or you want your blade to be smoother there, then this is how you would do that. And my main goal in doing this is to make the blade smoother. I don't necessarily care if I get every last scratch out. It's just when I cut through things, I want this surface to be smooth. So anyway, that's really all it took to get rid of those rougher scratches, or at least enough of them to make me happy. But like I say, you could do that for as long as you wanted there. And then if you wanted to, you could actually grab a finishing stone too and go over that thinned area with your finishing stone too, then that would make it really smooth like this. And again, you wouldn't have to do this, but it'll make your blade look nicer, and again, it'll make this part smoother, so as you cut through things, there's less friction. Again, it doesn't really matter what finishing stone you use. This one happens to be the Kitayama 8000, but any finishing stone would work fine for this. All right, and I'm gonna call that good. Blade feels nice and smooth. It's nice and thin. So we'll move on to sharpening the actual edge. So to sharpen the actual edge, this knife is in good enough shape. I'm just going to start on my medium grit stone, but if your knife was in really bad shape, then you might want to start on your rough stone. So your goal with any knife is to keep the angle as low as possible while still having it be durable enough that the edge holds up to normal use. Now obviously the best way to do that is to try to sharpen your knife as thin as possible, test it out, and when you hit the point where the edge does start to fail a little bit, then you come back and you resharpen it at just a slightly higher angle, and then you know that that is the best angle for your knife because it's as low as you can get without the edge failing. Anyway, but generally speaking, that's a lot lower than people think it's going to be. So, and on this knife, I know that's somewhere right around here. So anyway, so I'm just going to lay it flat, raise it up just a little bit to get the angle for the primary edge or the edge bevel. And then I'm just going to start sharpening in a new edge bevel like this. And because this knife is in pretty good shape and it's so thin, this will not take long to get a burr. So I already have a burr along the full length of that side. And the burr lets you know that you've gotten down to the edge, because when a knife is dull, the edge is rounded like this. When you grind away steel from one side, you make it flat and pointy again, and then you get what's called a burr, or a wire edge, on the other side of the blade. And then you grind away the other side and you make that flat and pointy, and then the burr moves to the opposite side. So since I was just sharpening on this side, down here, if I run my finger over here, I can feel the burr. But if I run my finger off the edge this way, I can't. So now that I know I have a burr on that side, I'm going to sharpen this side. Again, make sure you get up by the ricasso there. And since I sharpened on this side, I'm going to feel for the burr on this side, and I can clearly feel it sticking up like this. But again, if I feel on the side that was touching the stone, I won't be able to feel it. So anyway, now that I have a burr, I'm going to start focusing on removing it. Now, if I had done that on my rough stone, then I would just do the same thing on the medium grit stone to get rid of those scratches. But since I did this on the medium grit stone, I can go straight to deburring. So I'm going to start by just doing a few backwards or edge trailing strokes like this, meaning the edge is going away from the stone instead of into the stone. Again, same angle, should be nice and low. Don't need to do a ton of these, but this just helps to start refining your edge and getting the burr ready to come off. Also makes the apex of your edge a little bit thinner. All right, so that's good. Now I'll move on to the fine grit stone. So, like I said earlier, anything finishing stone will work. Anything in the 4,000 to 8,000, really even 3,000 to 8,000 grit range. Anyway, on your finishing stone, you're going to, on the edge bevel, only want to do edge trailing strokes like this. Because again, when you were polishing the thinning, you can go back and forth. But when you're trying to deburr and refine your edge, just stick with edge trailing strokes like this. And I have a whole video showing different deburring methods. But I'm going to show what's probably the easiest one for most people here. So after a bunch of strokes like that, I'm just going to take a soft piece of wood or plastic, draw the edge through it once or twice, just like that. And that just kind of folds the burr over so it lets the stone cut it off then. So then I'm going to go and do a few more of those. Do that again. And essentially you'll repeat this cycle a few times until you've completely removed your burr. And how many times that is kind of depends on the steel in your knife blade, what angle you're at, what stone you're using, a whole bunch of stuff like that. And also you'll feel that as you draw your knife through the wood like that, the first time where you have the biggest burr, it'll feel a lot rougher. And as you go along, it will start to feel a lot smoother. And so even how the knife feels when you draw it through the piece of wood will help you determine when you've gotten rid of the burr. And you can also check by feeling for the burr, although at some point it can become so microscopic that it can be hard to feel. Anyway, when you think you're done, you can finish up with just 1 or 2 alternating strokes on each side of the blade like that. And then you can draw your knife off and test it. So it shouldn't have to take real long to sharpen your pocket knife, especially if you've sharpened it before and you're just resharpening it. And obviously with me talking, it took quite a bit longer than if I had just done it on my own. Now, if you want, you could stop there. Your edge would be perfectly sharp. If you want, you could go ahead and you could strop that either on leather or you could dry your stone off and lay a piece of paper over it, and you could even just strop on the plain paper, and that would work out. But anyways, just to show you even straight off the stone like that, you can see that that knife shaves hair just fine with very little pressure. You just barely touch it and it shaves hair. Also, you can see that if you're more into testing on paper, how it cuts paper really cleanly, everything like that. But another way to test a folding knife like this that you might use for things where you need a little bit more durable edge is, say, you could take something like a piece of cardboard and say, well, how well does it cut through cardboard? Because the cardboard being stiffer, having a blade that's nice and thin like this behind the edge, because we thinned it, really matters. But still, you still need a sharp edge to be able to do it. So this helps you test your blade geometry too. And you'll see the knife has no problem cutting the cardboard. It's a very clean cut. There's no tearing or anything like that. And if you were to look at the edge, you would also see that there's no edge damage. Right? And it still cuts paper perfectly cleanly after that. So anyway, that's really all there is to sharpening a folding knife for everyday use.